Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. We are currently recording on Facebook Live. I have the phone line open for those of you who like to call in to ask specific questions. Feel free to call in on the teleconference line listed on the description of this recording. So we are continuing review of CDFM Module 4, Competency 3. And so Module 4, again, is the optional acquisition exam that you can take after you've already earned the CDFM. So you would have already passed Module 1, 2, and 3, earned the CDFM certification, and then you can take the optional Module 4 acquisition. So that's what we're going over today. All right, so now we got that out the way. So before we begin Module 3, just kind of recap Competency 3. Let me recap Competency 1 and 2. So Competency 1 is a recap of the JCITS process, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System. Once we know what the DoD strategy is, what the DoD's mission is to accomplish, then as the Department of Defense, the military, we need to determine what capabilities do we have to meet that strategy, and then what capability gaps, what are we missing in our inventory that we either need to buy, request funding for, or we need to develop that item. So that is what happens in the defense acquisition system. So when they do the JCITS process, they're looking at .MLPF. That's the acronym. Doctrine, Organization, Training, Leader Development, Education, and so forth. If it's anything other than material solution, that triggers the second DoD support system, which is the PPBE process. Plan, Program, Budget, Execution. That's where we request our funding. That is the system we use. If the .MLPF, the M, the material, while doing the JCITS, those joint support, once they do the JROC, Joint Requirements Oversight Council, who's chaired by the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, once they do their analytical process, they will identify a material solution. That is what triggers the acquisition system, the third system. And all three systems overlap to meet the Quadrennial Defense Review, the QDR, or the National Defense Strategy. In the 2011 study guide, it was called the QDR, Quadrennial Defense Review. So for Module 4, if you're taking the exam, QDR is the same thing as the National Defense Strategy in the newer books, the NDS, for Module 1, 2, and 3. So in Module 1, Module 4, Competency 1, I got to get that right, we are recapping the goals, the strategy, and the decision support. What we need to accomplish to meet that capability gap, what are the specifications, what's the baseline created by the program manager, what are the milestone decision authorities, what decisions are they making. Then we go through the next part. Once we do all those preliminaries, we go to competency number 2, which is systems engineering. Now we're moving, we've selected a system, now we're moving into the specifics of that system and developing that system. Systems engineering. So where we are today is competency number 3. We want to know, is this an investment I want to make? Affordability is saying, can I afford to buy this new aircraft? Can we afford to invest in new vehicles? A new DoD system, information system. Can we afford it? I can buy it, but can I afford to sustain it? Because remember, cradle to grave says that I not only have to develop and create and buy the item, I also have to be able to sustain it. If it has a life cycle for 10 years, that means that's money I have to invest in sustaining that item for 10 years. So that brings us to page 4.3.1, affordability. So if you see a chart at the bottom of that page, it says affordability is the degree to which the life cycle cost of an acquisition program in consonance with a long range plan, what we want to do, force structure, the manpower we have, the equipment we have, the individuals, the skill levels we have, and the department as a whole. We want to make sure all of that balances out when it comes to the funding we receive from Congress. On the left side, talks about DoD components are required to submit affordability assessments, and we're going to look at these in detail, but a diagram is easier to remember when you see the information again. Wink, wink, if you can see through my glasses, right? And then the second one on the left says program affordability is part of the JSIDS process. So even while they were going through identifying courses of actions in the JSIDS process, and also what it's gonna take to fill that capability gap, then they're also considering how much is it gonna cost to build. So warfighters' needs are identified on the left side of this diagram using, and what if you remember module 2, what is the requirements for the warfighters publishing? What is the name of the document? IPLs, Integrated Priority List. Then on the right side, we're talking specifically affordability assessments are required where? Milestone B and C. Remember I told you with this section, with this module, you're going to need to know what is happening at milestone A, B, or actually all the phases, material solution analysis, milestone A, technology development, or in the newer book, technology maturation risk reduction, milestone B, and production and deployment, engineering, manufacturing, production, and deployment. So all those phases, and they say, if they say affordability assessment, which milestone or where does this occur? Affordability assessments, the formal ones, are required. It doesn't mean that they're not doing a cost analysis throughout, but the affordability assessment, like a cost benefit analysis is what I compare it to, is required specifically at milestone B and C. Why at milestone B? Because remember, when does a formal acquisition program begin? It occurs at milestone B. So that particular right side of those diagrams, so affordability assessment, of course, will be done by your resource managers. So they do the cost benefit analysis. So it's not stated here, but it's in the material, so I want to make sure I pointed that out to you in case I forget when we go through the material. So on page 432, it repeats itself again, and I'm only going to focus on the last paragraph, the specific affordability assessment in words, what I just described on the previous page. Let me see something. Okay, so affordability assessments are done by resource managers at milestone B and C. The end. But make sure you read everything when you first go through the material. So that's all I want to say about that, because I've already stated it. When you're doing the defense acquisition system on page 436, you're primarily focusing on full funding, because at milestone B, I'm now saying once the milestone decision authority has approved to go into an acquisition program, that means the funding that is being requested will be full funding. I need all the money to get this item out to the warfighters. So what you need to know on this part, incremental funding is not authorized. When you're talking about affordability and full funding, I don't want some of the money. I need all of the funding to invest in this process. So the last paragraph says full funding is assessed by the milestone decision authority at each decision point. That's a repeat. So a lot of this stuff is repetitive when you go to the different competency areas. Even going on page 7, because I remember saying this last week, cost as an independent variable. That is the phrase, those are the words, CAIV, that is used simply to say that the best time to reduce costs is early on in the process. Remember, cost, schedule, performance. Cost, schedule, performance. Again, cost, schedule, performance. When you do the acquisition process, you are reviewing each one of those areas at every step of the way. We want to make sure we don't exceed the cost extensively. The schedule, you say you're going to do it in 2 weeks. It's now a month. Why? Because it's going to cost me more money. I got to pay more personnel. And performance, meaning the quality of the work that's being done is up to standard. So cost as an independent variable is important for you to know in the acquisition process when it comes to resource management. All right, the first part of competency 3, they give you this, always read the summary. I noticed with the module 4, the summaries are pretty good at recapping the important information that's here. The only thing I want to point out on page 8 with the summary, because just in case you haven't taken module 1, 2, and 3 recently, you may not have remembered the Future Year Defense Program, the FYDP, FYDP. Full funding means having an approved current resource stream to execute the acquisition program. It is included both in the budget and in the out years of the Future Year Defense Program. So remember, that's that DoD database that keeps track of the DoD's mission, the services that are using it, or the components, and the different appropriations used to service those missions. Over to page 439, we're going to look specifically on acquisition system costs. You touched on this in module 2 when we talked about the program acquisition costs and the unit costs. So this is a recap. If you notice on page 439, it says at the bottom, again, diagrams. I love diagrams because I can remember better. Life cycle costs versus total ownership costs. What is the difference? And it's listed in the words, but I like the diagrams, the snapshot first, and then I read through the material. So what I have here, research and development costs, investment costs, operations and support, disposal. What does that say to you? That says cradle to grave. All the costs. Well, if you go back to the phases and the milestone, you will remember which type of appropriation you use for each. RDT&E, procurement, MilCon, and operations and support, you use MilPERS and O&M. So they're talking about cradle to grave, which also includes your overhead costs, your admin, your indirect costs. All of those things are incorporated in your life cycle costs. If you go back to that life cycle cost composition. But what is total ownership cost? So everyone that has an invested cost in this process, their cost is incorporated to make the total. All of the elements of life cycle cost. So it includes the life cycle cost, but you also, as well as other infrastructure, other organizations who may contribute to the development of this product, you include that cost into it. So it's intra-government costs. All the other government agencies that contribute, they have a cost for what they spend to contribute, so you include that cost. So that is the difference between life cycle costs and total ownership. So total ownership is life cycle costs plus additional costs not directly attributed to that program. So I wanted to point that out there. They have a diagram you've seen already if you've been through Module 2, Competency 2, Cost and Economic Analysis, is page 4310. They give you the life cycle cost composition, how it looks, how it's broken down. So remember, development cost is your RDT&E, flyaway cost, procurement of the prime equipment, weapon systems cost is procurement of the prime equipment and support items. So that's your flyaway plus your procurement of your support items. Then you have procurement cost. Everything that's paid with procurement dollars make up your procurement cost. And when you put your RDT&E cost, procurement, and MilCon together for your facilities, MilCon facilities, that makes up your program acquisition costs. So your PAC. And then you have operations and support and disposal. Operations and support, you use O&M and MilPERS, and for disposal is your O&M dollars is used for that. When you put it all together, all of those appropriations make up your life cycle costs. How you may see it again, just like you did in Module 2, Competency 2, is you may receive a series of items paid with RDT&E, paid with O&M, paid with MilCon, procurement, and I might say, or someone else might ask you to calculate the program acquisition costs. And you're going to have to know that's my RDT&E, procurement, and MilCon. Everything that has those dollars, I need to add those up and divide it by the total number of equipment created. So remember your life cycle costs. Even though the formulas are not here, because the information overlaps with the other modules, it's important for you to remember the formulas that you learned in the earlier modules. Let's move on to page 4311. What do you need to know about this diagram? When you look at the percentage cost of your program, when you start off the program, you use RDT&E, then you got some procurement and MilCon, then operations and support, and then you have disposal. What does this diagram say to you? If all you're doing is looking at the diagram, and at the bottom of the diagram, you see milestone 8 and engineer and manufacturing all the way to production. But the quickest thing you'll see is that operations and support is the most expensive portion of a program. So you got to be able to interpret the diagram. And if you're interpreting the diagram, you'll see that operations and support is the most expensive, and the least is disposal. So remember, with the acquisition, it's an evolution. It can be evolutionary or single step. We evolve with various strategies based on our requirements, or single step if we have a commercial product already out there, or if we already have a product in inventory and all we're doing is building additional items. So I'll stick with the aircraft as my example. So if we have that aircraft already, but we requested and got approved to build more types of this aircraft, then that is what we do. Total ownership, we've already talked about, includes all the costs, life cycle plus additional. On page 4316, under that introduction, you should not be surprised by ACAT 1, Acquisition Category 1. That tells you is a major defense program. With ACAT 1 Delta, it's a DoD level program. ACAT 1C is a component level. If it's an automation system, ACAT 1A is a major automated information system. ACAT 1AM for the MAIS, M-A-I-S, is a DoD level information system versus an ACAT 1AC component level system. I'm recapping. That's what you need to do. And so what's mentioned here in this paragraph on the top of page 4316 of Module 4, Competency 3, Resource Management, analysis of the alternative. So this was back in material solution analysis. So you got to remember where you are in the process. Is required at major milestone decision points and at the full rate. So that tells me you're going to analyze the courses of action throughout the process. Then once you select one, you want to go ahead and review it to make sure it's meeting all the objectives and specifications listed. AOAs are an important element of the defense acquisition process. Let's see, check on learning. Who provides guidance on completing analysis of the alternative? It's got something to do with cost. The DK, Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. If it got anything to do with cost benefit analysis, affordability assessment, who does the cost benefit analysis for the DoD? That's the DK. So the DK provides guidance in analysis of the alternative. Moving on to page 17. Guess what? It starts off that first paragraph on page 4317. The Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation develops and approves study guidance for the analysis of the alternative. Ding, 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 ding. Right? So anytime you want to check me, go back in the material. If I say something incorrectly, feel free to send me a note, because I definitely don't want to give you the wrong information. And with anything in this process, the milestone decision authority is the one that directs whether we move forward, we stay where we are. He questions the data that is produced. So the MDA directs initiation of the AOA in the Acquisition Decision Memorandum. We've talked about this in earlier modules. When you're doing the acquisition system, the document that the Milestone Decision Authority personnel are updating is the Acquisition Decision Memorandum. So there's several elements starting on page 4318 that is reviewed when you're doing the analysis of the alternative. The first major step leading to a successful AOA is the creation of a well-considered analysis plan, right? You got to know what you're looking for, what you're looking at. The plan should establish a roadmap. So they list, 8 elements? Yeah. Introduction, ground rules, alternatives. So I'm not going to even go over all of this, but it's understanding the well-constrained analysis plan. That's your roadmap to completing the analysis of the alternative. So if you're remembering the process, the study guide kind of jumps back and forth. So you have to place yourself back on that diagram of that phases and that milestone to figure out, okay, where are we in the process? So it's not like consistently in order. You have to take it back because the funding is considered all the way at the beginning. So it doesn't start in the middle of the process. So I don't have anything there for that one. Let's move on to page 4323 at the bottom. Cost analysis. So it makes sense. We transition. We come up with what things cost. And then now in the analysis of the alternative, that's what you're doing. Now we need to actually analyze it. We need to do independent cost estimate. And let's see, we talked about the program office estimate, component cost estimate, and the independent cost estimate. So what I'm doing is, as we talk about a topic, I'm recapping when we talked about Module 2, Competency 2, we also talked about the different estimating methods. ICE was the DoD's level estimate. But remember, there was an estimate at the component level, and there's an estimate at the program management level. So let me see that. They do not mention it in this, but it doesn't mean you can't be tested on it. So I'm going to say it. Because I guarantee somebody's going to come back and say, it wasn't in Module 4, but I promise you, they're going to say, okay. But it's part of the process. All right, so let's see. Independent cost estimate. DCAPE, again, is in charge of that. Approval to proceed to technology development. Congress has required certain risk reporting aspects. So all of this is just a repeat of what we already discussed. Additional cost analysis on page 4325 in the acquisition we touched on earlier is the CARD. That is the cost analysis requirements description. For programs that will be reviewed by the OSD, Office of Cost Assessment, the program office is required to complete a CARD. So that's your program manager again. So you got your program, all the different program manager falls under a POE, program office, a program office. And so the PM not only creates the acquisition program baseline, the program manager also has to create a CARD. So these are high-ticket DoD level programs, written documents of the costs. Something that should already be familiar to you is on page 4327, begins there. Diagram. You have your cost estimating methods. So you got different ways to get cost estimate, and now you have the cost estimating methods. Yeah, cost methods. You got analogy, parametric, felt like I just said these. So it's 4 of them. Engineering and actual cost. So detail estimates, gross estimate versus more detail. It's gross if you're trying to come up with the cost of a program. An analogy means you have one similar item already in the inventory that does what's similar to what you want to develop, so you can use the cost of that item as your baseline. Analogy, that's a gross amount. We don't have any specifics for that, what you're doing. The second one is parametric, right? Parametric, statistical. You do that early on in the process, because these are your early. So let's say you're asked, which estimates do you use early on in the program development? You use parametric or analogy. Later on, when you have more detailed estimates or more detailed information, you can use actual cost or engineering. Engineering, more detail, bottom up. You actually have to come up with specific costs of every single step in that process. Or actual cost, meaning you already have these aircrafts in your inventory, so you're going to use that cost. So early on in the acquisition program versus later on, you use analogy or parametric, or you use actual cost versus engineering. That's all you really need to know for that section. And so in writing, you can see at the top of page 28, starting, page 28, they go through each one of those for you. So the engineer requirement, engineer estimate requires extensive knowledge. Remember, that's the same thing you've already learned in the past. Nothing new here. On page 30, 4330, so I kind of go through from my notes of when I took the 2-day class. These were some of the things that were important for us to remember. And yes, we saw it again. So I'm going to point this out to you. So when you're doing your cost analysis, you also, in contrast, you do a quantitative risk analysis. So remember, every decision you make, there is a associated risk. So you have to also determine what risk are you taking. So somewhere in that second paragraph, the way it starts off with, in contrast, quantitative risk analysis can provide a large overall, okay, that piece of it. But in the middle of that, it says risk analysis assesses the aggregate variability and overall estimate, because we want to make sure we know what decisions we're making, what's the associated risk, can we mitigate the risk, do we want to take the risk. Typically through Monte Carlo simulations, that's what I'm trying to get to. Those are the simulations that are used to determine the risk associated with that equipment. Monte Carlo simulation in the second paragraph on page 4330. Also, all right, so that's all I have to say over there. So in the Monte Carlo, this allows the analyst to determine, when you do that, let me talk a little bit about the Monte Carlo. So when you do the Monte Carlo simulations, you're simulating putting this equipment, this aircraft into combat, what's going to happen, what's it going to cost. And so you look at the lowest cost, the average cost to get the item versus the highest cost. Because again, all of that is considered in when you're making a purchase. If I buy the cheaper one, what type of risk is that versus buying the most expensive? All right, on page 4331, OSD, Office of Cost Assessment, all of that should be a repeat. However, let me point out, because for some of you, you've just passed module 1, 2, and 3 of the 2020 study guide, and then you come back to module 4. Now you got to switch your brain because some of the titles are different from the newer study guides, such as the senior acquisition person in the newer study guide is the USD-ANS. In the 2011 study guide, if you look on page 4331, in the middle of that first paragraph, you will see the acronym USD-ATNL. Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. That is the title of the Milestone Decision Authority, the Chief Acquisition Executive, the Senior Acquisition Person at the DoD level. The Milestone Decision Authority at the DoD level is the USD-ATNL. ATNL, which is different from the newer books. So make sure you know that, the title. So if you see it again, you won't be like, well, who's the USD-ATNL? I thought it was the USD-ANS. It's the same person. They just changed the title. So they talk about independent cost estimates, repeat. I'm not going over that again because that's all repetitive. Cost assessment, again on page 4332. They give you the event and the timeline. So the cost assessment review, did I really look at this in depth? Not really. What I did on the paragraph, it talks about the cost assessment. The card is used to describe formally the acquisition program for purposes of preparing both the program office estimate and the OSD Office of Cost Assessment, the independent cost estimate. So the card, so you got the acquisition program baseline, then you got the card, the cost breakdown, cost analysis requirement document. That's all used in order to move on to the different phases and milestones. All right, recap, summary on page 34. Please review. So 10 U.S. Code 2434 requires that independent life cycle cost estimate be prepared. Independent cost estimate based on U.S. Code 2434, listed on page 4334. All right, so here we go now. This is, and remember, this section, I don't know, I keep saying remember, competency number 3 is worth more than all the other competencies because you deal with resource management and then the EVM, earned value management, we touched on in module 2, but now you're going to go more in depth. And there's a lot of calculations and formulas involved that you're going to have to remember. So the bottom of page 4335 says EVM is the tool that is used to provide oversight of these major defense programs between your program manager, the contracting officer representative, and the contractor that's doing the job. So government, how we rate the job that's being performed by a contractor. The top of page 36, it gives you the definition, the tool used between your government contractor and the program manager to have visibility, cost, schedule, performance. Mentioned again in the top of page 36. EVM applicability. When do we have to do the earned value management? It says any contract valued at or greater than $20 million. So that's something important to know, right? So you do EVM 20M when you have contracts that are greater than 20 million, and EVM has to be conducted. That's what I pulled out of that page. On page 37, EVM is a management tool that does 1, 2, 3 things. All right. The first one, it relates the scope of work to the budget and the schedule. Right? Cost, schedule, performance. So I'm going to relate what needs to be done to how much I'm paying for it and how long it takes you to do it. Scope of work to budget and schedule. The second thing EVM does, it measures the work progress based on the objectives. Like, it's no different than if you're a contracting officer representative of a contract and you're monitoring the steps. You're approving that, okay, yep, contractor have done step 1. Let's move to step 2. And then step 3 states the value of the work. Once the work is completed, we're going to put a value on the work. You're putting an addition on your home. We're going to know how much it costs, how long it's going to take them to do it. I'm going to relate the scope of the work to my budget and schedule. I'm putting the addition on my home. I'm going to measure the work progress. How long is it taking you to do it? Based on how long you told me in the contract you're going to do it. And then we're going to look at, once you put the addition on the home, what is now my value? What is the value of the work completed? Scope to budget and schedule, work progress, and value of the work. Those are the 3 things that is done in the EVM process, earned value management process. On page 4339, and let me see if they give you the formulas. So I'll just go over the formulas again. All right. So on page 4339, we've talked about schedule variance and cost variance, meaning the difference between what I plan to spend and what I actually spend. The difference between, you told me it was going to take 2 weeks to complete the job. Now we're at 2 months into the job. Now it's costing me more money because I can't use that facility that you're repairing. So that's what that is. Now the diagram on the bottom of page 39. First step is you need to know what these acronyms mean. BCWS, ACWP. And I'm trying to see if they give you the formulas, because that's what you're going to need, other than me stating. So the formulas are on page 47, but we're going to go through. So you'll come back to this page once you get through page 47. So ideally, you can see a diagram like this, and they can ask you, is the program on schedule? Is the program costing more than was planned? What can be done if the program deviates from the plan? So most likely it'll be, is the program ahead of schedule, behind schedule, or on target? And so when you learn the formulas, you'll be able to come back to this diagram and be able to look and see, okay, well, based on the lines going from left to right, if it's you have B, C, W, S, and go higher, now you come to your actual cost of work performed, then you're going to be able, so we're going to come back to this on page 39. Let me put my sticky note here so I come back to that page once we learn what the formulas are. So the terms are listed on page 40. 4340. You got the budgeted cost of work schedule, BCWS. I promise you, if you keep going over these, it'll make sense to you. And I'm going to try my best to kind of format it where it'll be easy to remember. Because initially when you listen to things like this, it's like, what? BCWS, WP, what? What I want to point out on page 4340, the second one, the second bullet says, the budgeted cost of work performed, and then or earned value. So if they say what is the earned value, they're probably going to give you the BCWP, and you need to know that budgeted cost of work performed is the same thing as earned value. So that's one thing there. ACWP is the actual cost of the work performed, what it actually cost me to do it, the budget at the completion of the project, and the estimate at the completion. We're going to compare what we estimated it was going to cost me at the completion versus the actual budget once it's completed. They also give you the definition, BCWS. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to write down BCWS is the value of all work scheduled to be accomplished in a certain period. That's what I budgeted for. I estimated for. So, and based on the schedule, this is how much it's supposed to cost me. Budgeted schedule. Then you have budgeted cost of work performed is the value of the work. So what I'm doing is writing in my book the acronym and the difference between budgeted cost of work schedule, the budget based on the schedule, and the budget based on the job that was done. So the value of the work, value of work. So I'm reading the second to last paragraph. That's where I'm pulling this information. You also have the actual cost of work performed is equal to the cost incurred and recorded for performance measurement with a given period, and it's simply the actual cost. So that's actual cost. So the one with the A in front of it is actual cost. BAC represents the budget for the total contract through any given level authorized work, while EAC represents the estimate for that same level of work. So that's easier to remember. So by looking at those elements, you'll be able to determine if the contract is overrun, cost overrun. That means we're incrementally spending more than we plan to spend, or underrun, we're spending less. Comparing the final cost of the contract with the contract budget base, the negotiated contract cost, plus the estimated. So we're going to look at each one of those. So again, at the back, the last few pages of this section, they have examples. I would advise you to review it so that you can get an understanding of the information. Once we're done, once I get there, we're going to run through some of them. So that's EVM. On page 41, now we're going to look at EVM techniques, different ways to do earned value management. You got 0 to 100. You got percent start versus percent. So you're trying to calculate when the program manager and the contractor sits down to go over EVM, they can use a percentage of what is start versus the finish. And if you read through that paragraph on page 4341, and that's about the middle, It says earned value or BCWP. Remember, earned value and BCWP is the same thing. Budgeted cost of work performed is realized in the reporting periods the work actually starts, when the work actually starts and finished. This technique tends to overstate performance in the first half of the period and understate performance in the last half. So that was a note that I had highlighted that we should go over. So under the percent start, percent finish in the EVM technique, so either you can do 50-50, 25-75, but what it does, it overstates the performance because I expect you to do these great things. So I'm going to overstate it in the beginning and understate it in the last half of that program or review. Another technique on page 4342 is the weighted milestone EV technique. And the second line of that says it is the best EV technique for long-term discrete work. Whenever you see something say is the least preferred, the most preferred, the best, then that's something important to know. So which method is the best method for long-term discrete work? That is the weighted milestone. We're going to weight how much does each particular part of the process weigh. On the bottom of page 42, you also have apportioned effort EV technique. Is an EV technique as well as a work package. It's typically a support task or staff function which can be tied to a discrete task. So a portion, that means you can tag this particular function to a specific task in the process. That's the apportion. So the bottom line with all of these techniques, read them and know which one you're talking about in that process. So in the case you see it in a multiple choice scenario, you'll be able to see and determine, okay, well, which one, if I had to match them, can I match them with the level of significance? All right, page 4343, level of effort. It says this is the least desirable of all the EV techniques. If nothing else, you need to know the best and the least. So level of effort is the worst method. Performance measurement baseline. So again, back in the beginning, the program manager had to do a baseline so they can figure out what's the estimated cost for the program. And so one of the most important steps in any earned value management system is the establishment of that baseline. Or guess what? That baseline has another name, budgeted cost of work schedule. That is what it's saying in that first sentence under PMB on page 4343. So your budgeted cost of work performed is the same thing as earned value, and then your baseline is the same thing as budgeted cost of work schedule. So that's two notes to pull out there. So the PMB includes, and it does not include management reserve. So your program manager come up with that estimate baseline, but that baseline does not include management reserve. That money we need to usually put aside is not included in that initial baseline. So the management reserve in this process is controlled by the vendor. The contractor owns the management reserve. So it's not included in our acquisition program baseline. So in EVM, BCWS equals PMB, baseline. Okay, straightforward. 4345, more about the baseline. All right, let's move to page 4346. So when the program manager does that initial baseline, as you move along in the process and they identify better cost estimates, then you have to change the baseline. So on the bottom of page 46, there's two definitions or a few definitions that you're going to need to know. Rebaselining, that's changing the baseline, adjusting the baseline. There's two part of it. Replanning versus reprogramming. What is the difference? Replanning is realigning within the same schedule, the same budget. You're going to realign things in that effort to enhance that program. Versus a reprogram is you're realigning the remaining performance measurement baseline that results in a total budget or a total schedule that exceeds. So you readjust due to being over budget or over schedule. So you got to do some reprogramming because you got to get funding from elsewhere. So replanning is internal schedule realignment versus reprogramming occurs when you have exceeded your total budget or total schedule. On page 4347, we go into the Evm formulas. This is your bread and butter for this section. And actually, I took my exam last year, which was 2021 for Module 4, and the majority of the questions were from EVM, Earned Value Management, in one form or the other. And they're not going to tell you you're going to get the acronyms. You're not going to get the explanations of what the acronyms are. You're going to get BCWP, ACWP, and so forth. And then you're going to have to explain, is it ahead of schedule, on target, or under schedule? So what does the cost variance mean? So cost variance on 47 formula, cost variance is your budgeted cost of work performed minus your actual cost of work performed. Schedule variance is your budgeted cost of work performed minus your budgeted schedule. Variance at completion, once you complete it, what is the difference? What's the variance? Is your budget actual cost and your estimate at completion. Budget at completion, estimate at completion. And I'm running through these because I want to get to the examples because it's easier to remember as you do them. But what you need to know for cost variance, a positive variance is favorable. So if it's positive, and like that diagram we had on page 39, if you're going up, that means it's getting higher. That means it's positive. So that's a good thing. So a positive variance is favorable. Versus if it's the line is going down and they ask you what type of cost variance is that means it's bad. A number above 0 is good. A number below 0 is bad. So if you get a negative number when you do your calculations, it means you're over budget. When you're doing a cost variance, you're looking at over budget, under budget, or on target. Schedule variance. A negative variance is unfavorable, right? Same thing, negative. And indicates a contractor might be behind schedule. So a negative schedule variance means the contractor is behind schedule. So it's not just learning the formulas, it's learning what do they mean. Like my command used to say, my boss used to say, so what? Okay, yes, you can do some calculations. What does that mean? What does the data mean to me? So am I behind schedule, ahead of schedule, or on target? Some other formulas on page 4348. Performance factors, if you have to calculate CPI, and yes, you might see some of these. Any one of these formulas is game. And they might give you CPI, SPI, and then they're going to tell you on the next page, calculate the estimate at completion. So you got to know the formulas. So cost performance index really is the same exact formula as the variances, but the difference is with the variance you're subtracting, and when you look at the indices, you're dividing. So that's how I look at it. So the formula is the same, so you're not learning anything new. The formula or the budgeted cost of work performed, either minus ACWP or divide for the index. Then percent complete on the bottom of 48, you may have to do. They might say you're doing a job or I know we've seen one where you had inventory at the beginning of January, your inventory was X amount, was 100. Then at the beginning of February, your inventory is at 80. What is the percent change? So it's similar here to the percent complete in the job. And they give you the formula there. So you're going to have to learn it. Unfortunately, there's no easy way for me to tell you other than recording the formulas on a sheet of paper that is easier for you. And again, if you haven't already sent me an email to request it, you can email me or leave me a note here with your email, and then I can send it to you. You can send me a message, and I'll send you my Module 4 notes, which also includes all these formulas and easy ways to try to remember. On page 4349, I definitely had this. I've seen this on when I took the exam, the estimate at completion. So it's estimate at completion, the formula is actual cost of work performed plus per budget at completion minus budget of cost of work performed divided by performance factor. And guess what? You have to calculate the performance factor. How do you do that? Performance factor is the CPI on page 48, the performance index. The CPI times the SPI gives you performance factor. So in the event they give you everything else and you have to calculate what's the performance factor. You have to know that CPI times SPI equals your performance factor. That's your indices. All right, we're almost there. So now, let's see. All right, so before we go to page 5253, all right, so what we're going to do, actually, let's go to page 4352. Stay with me. Stay with me. I know it's a lot. That's why I kind of schedule either this week and probably if I need to go recap some stuff next week, I'll do that also. But this is, the majority of the exam comes from this information. It's a lot in these few pages. So let's go to the examples. I typically don't do the practical exercises, but for this one, I want to do that just to kind of get you started. I'm not going to do all of them, but just to get you there. Page 4352, examples of variances. And they tell you, behind schedule, this particular one is behind schedule over budget. So I'm going to look at the contractor has incurred $20 million more costs than planned to complete the work actually completed and has taken $20 million greater in scheduled time than planned to complete the job. Okay, so how do we get $20 million? If you do the schedule, when they say variance, cost variance and schedule variance. So cost variance was budgeted cost of work performed minus is it actual cost of work performed, right? Performed and performed. That's how I remember. All right, let me go see. Yeah. So cost variance is budgeted cost of work performed minus actual cost of work performed. So that's taking 80 minus 100. So cost variance is 80 minus 100. That's a negative 20. So when it comes to cost, I can say that this project is over budget. How can I say it's behind schedule? If I do a schedule variance, is budgeted cost of work performed minus budgeted cost of work schedule. So the BCWP is the same for both. And if I'm talking about costs, I'm going to go with cost, and then I'm talking about schedule, I'm going to use the one with the schedule. So it's the same thing. They gave the same value. Budgeted cost of work performed is 80, and budgeted cost of work schedule is 100. So 80 minus 100 is a negative 20 million. And how do you interpret that? You interpret that program is behind schedule because it's a negative number. Right? So when you're talking schedule, you're either ahead or behind schedule. So if it's a 0, then it means you're on target. Let's do another one. So that's number 1. Number 2 says on schedule, on budget. So here you go. Here's one that's on target. So formula is budgeted cost of work performed minus actual cost of work performed. So budgeted cost of work performed is 100 minus 100. That's 0 for cost variance. Cost variance says I am on target. If it's a 0, I'm on target. Budgeted cost of work performed, I'm doing the schedule variance, minus budgeted cost of work schedule, cost work schedule. 100 minus 100, that's 0. So that tells me when it comes to schedule variance, I am on schedule, on target. Here's another one, number 3. Ahead of schedule versus under budget. So, budgeted cost of work performed is 100 minus actual cost of work performed is 80 equals a positive 20. So a positive 20 when it comes to schedule I'm doing, which one? Hold up. No. Positive 20 when it comes to cost variance is under budget. A positive number means I'm under budget when I'm talking about cost. Schedule variance, 100 minus 80 is a positive 20. When it comes to schedule variance, I'm ahead of schedule. Positive is good, ahead of schedule. Or if it's a 0, it's on target. Might as well keep going. Number 4 at the bottom of page 4352. Ahead of schedule versus over budget. Even if I didn't know the answer, ahead of schedule will mean it's a positive schedule variance, and over budget would mean it's a negative cost variance. That's me not even looking at the numbers. I need to know what ahead of schedule versus over budget. All right, so if I do the calculations, a cost variance is budgeted cost of work performed, BCWP 100 minus actual cost of work performed of 120. I budget for 100, but it costs me 120. So I am over budget. The schedule part of it says budgeted cost of work performed is 100 minus budgeted cost of work schedule is 80. 100 minus 80 is a positive 20. That's ahead of schedule. So I can be ahead of schedule and over budget. All right, let's see what these other ones are. Might as well keep going. Number 5. Number 5 is, and this is the last variance, behind schedule, under budget. Even before I look at numbers, well, behind schedule means I have a negative number, and under budget, that means, which is good, means I have a positive number, right? Because I'm talking cost. So let's do the behind schedule part. Behind schedule is budgeted cost of work performed, that's 100, minus budgeted cost of work schedule, that's 120. 100 minus 120 equal negative 20. So I am behind schedule. Let's talk cost variance. Let's talk cost. Budgeted cost of work performed minus which is 100 minus actual cost of work performed, 100 minus 80 equal a positive 20. Positive cost variance is under budget. So that's what you're going to need to know. And then I'm going to go back to the diagram and try to make sense of, if all you have is a diagram, can you, and not numbers, can you say if I'm on behind schedule, on schedule, ahead of schedule, under budget, on target for my budget, or I am over budget? And then the indices, you can work those through with the CPI and the SPI. So you have, they gave you cost performance index, percent complete, percent spent. All right, so I want to go back now to page 39, 4339. Excuse me. So cost variance says budgeted cost of work performed minus the actual cost of work performed. I want the number to be a positive number, because a positive cost variance says I'm under budget. So let's see what this diagram. So I found my BCWP on the diagram, which is, if I had the lower part of the graph, you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So like between number 3 and number 4, you see the BCWP minus the ACWP. Because it's a diagram, you can see that your ACWP number is greater than the BCWP, right? It's bigger. So if you have a small number minus a bigger number, then that tells me that my answer is going to be a negative number. So I can say that this particular program will be over budget. Let me do another one. Let me do schedule variance. So schedule variance uses the BCWP and the BCWS. BCWP minus BCWS. So that's time. We're looking at cost. I think time is on the bottom and cost is on the left side. So BCWP minus BCWS. If I have a positive number, I'm ahead of schedule. If I have a negative number. So you kind of have to look. They give you the schedule variance where they show the diagram and the cost variance. So you will see that your schedule variance falls within that gap, but it is ahead of schedule. The time now versus what it's supposed to be. So that's kind of stuff you're going to have to do. But you have to learn the formulas first to get there. So I don't want to linger on that. Make it any more confusing. All right, so you got some acronyms on 57. They explain it again, what those mean. And then you have another example on page 59. Let me see what this says. Using the performance measurement baseline data, they give you, okay, a good situation. They give you the budget cost of work schedule, perform, actual, in situation A and situation B. And this is exercise that was part of our Competency 3 EVM. So you got to just do the cost variance and the schedule variance and determine if you're over budget, under budget, or on target, or schedule on ahead of schedule, over schedule, ahead of schedule, or on target. Okay, so that was a lot for just this small section. But this, again, the majority of the questions for Module 4 comes from Competency 3. Competency 3 is made up of resource management, cost analysis data, and EVM, earned value management. The majority of the questions is probably focused on EVM. So know those formulas. So just, again, rewrite them on a sheet of paper, go through them, get an understanding. So even if you don't have dollar amounts, you should know it. What does a positive cost variance mean? What does a cost variance of 0 mean? What does a cost variance of a negative number mean versus over budget, under budget? So think about it in that process. All right, looks like we have gotten through CDFM Module 4, Competency 3, Resource Management. Later on today, I will upload these slides on our YouTube, and you can access them from there to recap as you're reviewing this module in this section. Be sure to leave your comments at the bottom of the video. If you're on Facebook or if you're on the phone line, you're always welcome to stop me and ask questions at that time. If not, once the videos get uploaded to our YouTube page, you're welcome to leave your questions on the YouTube. If you have not already subscribed to the CDFM Study Group YouTube page, please consider to subscribe. Even if you don't really be on YouTube, it doesn't cost you anything, but the more people that shows interest in our YouTube page, then it gets advertised on the platform.